Hey guys, I am Pixel Dan, and this is a review of the Masters of the Universe Origins San Diego Comic-Con 2019 exclusive He-Man and Prince Adam 2-pack from Mattel. That is right, my friends. Mattel is bringing a brand new style He-Man action figure to San Diego Comic-Con 2019. They are dubbing this Masters of the Universe Origins, and right now the word is that this might possibly be the start of a brand new He-Man toy line from Mattel. So let's go ahead and dive on in and take a look at this exclusive. Very special thanks to the folks at Mattel for sending this along before the convention so we can get a good look at it outside of the box. But let's start with the box first of all. Because this is a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive, it's got some pretty amazing packaging. I mean, they went all out for this. So this is the outer box right here, basically what you would call the mailer. It's got a really cool green gray skull brick design wrapped all the way around the box with He-Man's power harness there, the armor kind of strapped over it. It's pretty cool looking. You can see over on one side of the box it's etched with "By the Power of Grayskull," with the other side saying "I have the power." And then the back of the box just has the back of his harness. Hey, with the red dots on the back. That's important for what we're going to talk about with the figure here. And then the top of the mailer box there just bears the Masters of the Universe logo. So within that mailer box is where things get really fun. This is the actual box that houses our brand new Origins action figures. And as you can see, it is really cool because it is designed after the classic mini comics. In fact, this looks like a very familiar cover for longtime fans of the Masters of the Universe franchise. This line looks like it's kind of going back to the very early days of Masters of the Universe, being based on a lot of the elements from those early mini comics and some of the early concepts for the line. So it's really interesting stuff. The front there, of course, has got that great image of Castle Grayskull. That early image there with the awesome Alcala-inspired artwork there on the front. I believe this is new artwork, like recreation of that, but still very, very cool. The side of the box is really great because you can see it's got the split halves there with Prince Adam over here, He-Man over here, and the power sword in the middle with the lightning drawing down on it. The back has got a cool little scroll, which is like a cross-sell basically. Look, I love this. New for 19 has a very vintage feel to it. So look, Prince Adam, heroic secret identity of He-Man, and He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe. Very cool stuff. And you can see 5.5 inch, 5.5, my friends. That is the scale of these figures, just like the vintage toy line. And then over here on the side, we've got the image of Prince Adam. So this is where things get really fun, because this is a slipcover over the box. So you can see on the front, He-Man, Man-at-Arms, Beastman, Skeletor, they're part of the slipcover. We remove that, we're left with just this amazing artwork of Castle Grayskull. But even more than that, look at this. Over here on the side, Prince Adam turns into He-Man underneath. How cool is that? Over on this side, you remove the sword, you can see the split between the two characters. And then the back, look at that. It's He-Man and Battle Cat and the spirit of Castle Grayskull. Really, really fun stuff here. So, once you remove that slipcover, we've got this great opening box here. And what's really cool about this is it's basically a comic book. So this is the cover to your comic, and then the inside actually has a comic book, which is really cool. So I have to give a very special shout out to Axel Jimenez and Val Staples. I know they were responsible for the awesome artwork on this packaging here. So when we open it up, over here on the left side, we can see this great window that showcases our brand new Prince Adam action figure. You can see Skeletor's down here in the front. And what's really cool is this right here acts as the first page of the comic. And then we've got this brand new comic in here, which is on this real thick kind of like cardstock, which is awesome. The artwork is absolutely inspired by the early Alcala stuff, but this is like a brand new comic, which is totally taking some story elements and inspiration from the original mini comic. So it tells a story of Skeletor confronting Prince Adam. Really fun stuff there. When you flip it around, look, you've got Prince Adam kind of doubting himself. Look, we've got mini comic style King Randor here, where he looks a lot older with the white hair. I wonder if this Man-at-Arms has no mustache, but we do have also the blonde-haired Tila here, and as he's thinking about the goddess, not the sorceress, the goddess, it's the Green Goddess. We even have like a recreation of that classic scene there, but instead of like Savage He-Man, it's like this Prince Adam meeting with the goddess. I love like this recreation of like the Battle Cat box art up here with, look at that, the mask is laying there on the ground. See, there's the goddess offering up the weapons. Look, how cool is this? This is just really, really fun stuff, how they're meshing all this together. And then you can see her right here giving him the power of He-Man. And this window box right here showing the He-Man figure acts as the last panel of the comic. The packaging is really creative. And it's worth noting that these pages right here are removable. You can see they're just like on these little lips that you can just pull right out there with these little tabs. Boom, just like that. And that leaves us with our two windows there showing the figures. And these are easily removable. You can see there's actually little tabs up here that you can grab onto with your finger and your thumb, and you can pull the window out, and just like that, we've got our clamshell with our figures, so we can pop out our figures and our accessories, and that way, if you decide you want to pop them back in here, you can totally do it. This is collector-friendly packaging, my friends. Really, really incredible stuff. I love the box here, but I think I've spent enough time on that. Let's go ahead and pull the action figures out and really take a look at them. All right, so we've got He-Man and Prince Adam outside of their box. Let's go and take a look at them, and I want to start right here by showing you exactly what is included in this box set. As you can see, we have two full action figures, one for Adam, one for He-Man. Each of them have interchangeable heads, as well as 4 extra hands. And then we've got the power sword, the shield, and the battle axe. So there's a lot going on inside of this package here. If I bring in the tape measure, stand it between them, you can see that the figure is almost actually a full 6 inches tall when they're standing up straight. Now, if you remember, the vintage toy line had that kind of squat-legged look to it. So if you kind of bend the knees and hunch him down, he's more in that 5.5 scale of the vintage line. But the actual like style of the figure is definitely more in line with the vintage toy line rather than what we've seen with Masters of the Universe Classics, which is a full 7-inch line. So that's what to expect as far as the size goes with these figures. So I'm gonna go ahead and move these accessories out of the way for just a bit. We're gonna rest Prince Adam off to the side because we're gonna start off by taking a look at the most powerful man in the universe himself, in He-Man. And one of the things that's really interesting with these guys is that they are definitely more modeled after the vintage toy line as far as their overall aesthetic goes, but they've incorporated a lot more articulation, as you can see. So it's almost like a weird amalgamation of the vintage line and the Masters of the Universe Classics line. So let's just go ahead and get that out of the way and talk about that articulation. The head is on a ball joint very, very similar to Masters of the Universe Classics. So you can see it rolls all the way around at the neck, turns left and right, and the head does pop off at the ball joint exactly like a Masters of the Universe Classics action figure. So really interesting stuff. We do have these ball-like hinge joints there at the shoulders, so the arms can go outwards, they go down. There's no swivel at the bicep, but instead the swivel is at the elbow, and then we have a good elbow bend. There's actually a good range of motion there. They do have these cuts in the elbows that are pretty big, and I kind of talked about this when the figures were first revealed. That does kind of take away from the sculpt a little bit for me, so I wish those weren't so prevalent there, but you can see still good range of motion. And then, of course, you got swivels at the wrist, and you've also got hinge joints at the wrist. And I showed you how they've got all those interchangeable hands. So if you give a good tug on there, boom, look at that. It's just a little peg that pulls right out of the wrist, so we can swap hands. So we'll come back to that so I can show you the different hands. There's no other articulation in the torso, but we can swivel at the waist there. We've got these ball joints there at the thighs. They're like ball hinges, so the legs can go outwards. They can move forwards and backwards there. You got swivels at the knee as well as bends at the knee. Really interesting how the sculpt kind of hides the knee articulation there. You can see how that's done. And then we've got swivels at the boot cut there. And then the ankles move forwards and backwards as well as rock side to side. So there is a lot more articulation in these figures than we would have ever seen in the vintage Masters of the Universe toy line. And it's a bit weird, to be honest, because it feels like I'm holding a vintage toy, but then he's got all that extra articulation. And you can see it functions pretty well. For the most part, the joints seem kind of tight. The ankles are a little loose on mine, but it's not too bad. For the most part, he stands just fine. You can see I've had no problems kind of putting him in different poses here and standing him up. You can see he's balancing fine, so that's pretty good. The plastic on this guy is pretty solid. The legs almost feel a little softer. I don't know, it's like a softer kind of plastic. You can see they're not really very shiny or glossy, so it's almost like a matte plastic, and it just doesn't have the same feel as like the vintage toys, and I think that's the only reason I'm bringing it up, because it looks like a vintage toy, but it doesn't really feel like a vintage toy. There's definitely a bit of a different feeling in the plastic there, and who knows, that could also be just because of the way plastics are these days. So the harness here is very similar to the vintage one in the way that you can remove it, but it is a new way to do it. You'll notice that there's like a nice square red peg right there in the middle of the back, and if you just kind of pop up on that, look at that, the harness kind of comes off this way, so then you can pull it over the waist, and then you'll notice this. How in the world would you actually take this off because of the way it is? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I need to show you something. Let me put this harness back on first. I will say, it's a little bit tough to kind of stretch the harness back on and get it on that peg. So that takes a little bit of work there. Okay, so the harness is removable. I got that back attached. This is something really interesting that I actually found out by accident while pulling him out of the box. Look at this. You can actually remove the torso from the legs. Like, this is just attached via a peg. This is definitely meant to do this. So this really makes me wonder, like, we don't have a full confirmation yet if this is going to turn to a full toy line. Rumors are saying that it's going to be a full toy line. I wonder if they're doing something with interchangeable parts there. Maybe that is there for a reason. So that's really interesting, how you can pull them apart at the waist. And he clips in there nice and solid. You can see it's a real good clasp. I mean, he holds on really good. So that's how you would get the bottom of the power harness off there if you wanted to. So overall design here, like I mentioned, he's very much inspired by the vintage toy, but we've got some different elements going on. First of all, you'll notice that this particular head sculpt is more inspired by the way He-Man looked in those original mini comics. Has a bit of that Alfredo Alcala look to him, which was the artist on those early mini comics. And we've seen head sculpts similar to this in Masters of the Universe Classics as well. So if you don't want to use that, they also included a head sculpt that very much looks like the vintage action figure. And again, the head just pops off much like we've seen with some of the modern He-Man figures, and then you can just put the new one on in its place, and look at that. Now we've got something that looks very much like the vintage action figure, but with a lot more articulation. So going along with a lot of those cues from the original designs or original mini comics, or even the original concepts for the figure, some of the differences also are with the power harness. You'll notice that the red squares go all the way down on the back. That's from the early concept designs for the He-Man figure, as well as this little dagger in his boot. This is pretty amazing because this is the first time we've actually gotten the removable dagger for He-Man's boot. That was part of the concept, one of the concepts for the original He-Man action figure line that never made it to the real figure. So for the first time, we've now got He-Man with this cool little removable dagger in his boot. That is pretty cool stuff. So the overall design is pretty neat. I will say the colors on this guy are very, very bright. So the red is a very bright red seen there on the harness. You got a nice bright orange on the belt and the bracers. And then it's brown on the boots and the little furry loincloth there that he's wearing. And I do say little because one of the other things I talked about when these were first revealed is I feel like the crotch region is a bit too small on these figures, and that sounds funny saying that, but I know you guys see it. And it has something to do with the way they built the articulation there. It just looks too small. So hopefully, I don't know if these are, like I said, if these are going forward, maybe that's something that they can kind of fix. I feel like those are my biggest nitpicks, are the joints in the elbows and the pelvic piece there. Otherwise, this is a pretty fun, solid toy. I think the design is a lot of fun here. There's some really neat things going on. So let's take a look at some of the other accessories that this guy comes with. I talked about all those interchangeable hands. So you'll notice right now we've got him with like the gripping right hand and the open left hand. That's very much like the vintage action figure. But if you want to, we also have two closed fists for some nice punching action, which is really, really cool. And we've also got two open hands. So if you just want to have them with open hands, you can pop those on as well. But it's really cool having these closed fists for He-Man. That's something else that we don't really see. Also, interchangeable hands like this is something that's fairly new, because we didn't even really see much of that, if anything, like that in Masters of the Universe Classics. This is really cool, especially with the hinges on the wrists. Man, the poses you can get with this guy is amazing. I mean, we can full on get some flexing with He-Man. It's amazing. So yeah, this is pretty fun to play around with, actually. With the posability of this guy is quite impressive, and the interchangeable parts really make it a lot of fun for finding different ways to display the figure. Okay, so let's talk about those other weapons that he comes with. So, we're talking about this being like a classic barbarian style He-Man. So he does come with the battle axe, but if you're a power sword person, he also comes with the power sword. And you'll notice that the power sword is definitely designed more like that Alcala power sword in the vintage mini comics. So these are brand new sculpts. They're not shared from classics or anything like that. These are brand new. You can see they're kind of molded in like a semi-shiny silver plastic. And he's got the one gripping hand to hold onto the weapons. Now, I will say, and that's a perfect example right there, the handle on the sword is actually really thick, and his hand has a hard time holding onto it really good. It's not a very good grip. It pops out of his hand a lot, so you really gotta kind of mess with it there and find a good way to keep it in. On the flip side, the battle axe has a much thinner handle. I mean, look at these two side by side. I'm not real sure why the sword has such a larger grip than the axe, and that's actually a bit of a problem because the power sword kind of stretches his hand out a bit, and then he really has a loose grip on the battle axe. So you can see at least he's holding this one, you know, in his hand a little bit better than he was gripping onto the sword, but it's not a very tight grip. So I'm a bit bummed out by the fact that he doesn't get as tight of a grip on the weapons as I'd like him to. Now, the shield is pretty cool. You can see it's a little bit more rounded than the vintage shield. And then it's got like a little rest that kind of goes over the forearm, the clip there, and then he's got a little handle. Now, even though it's got a handle, the other gripping hand still doesn't really grab onto that very well. You still need to use this open hand like on the vintage toy, and that just kind of goes through there, and then you can clip onto the wrist. And he holds it a lot like the vintage one, except now with the added articulation, you can actually pose him around with that shield a little bit better. So it's pretty cool stuff. All right, so He-Man is out of the way. Let's go ahead and focus a little bit more on Prince Adam. Now, the figures themselves are the same build and the same head sculpt and all that good stuff, but you'll notice, like, if we look at them side by side, He-Man's got that tan. He's also got darker yellow hair. Adam's hair is a much brighter yellow. The wrist bracers are yellow. You know, he's got a lot of different colors going on. The boots aren't as detailed as He-Man's, so they're not just like exactly the same figure in there twice. While the actual sculpt of the toy is the same, he does have different paint deco there, and of course different accessories, because Adam has got this really cool little cloth tunic thing on, which I actually really love because it's got this very shiny gold and red around the sleeves there, and he's got a little jewel on his belt. It's very similar to the way they did the vest on the vintage Prince Adam toy, but this is like a softer material than that was, but you know, it still has the little elastic belt holding it in place and all that stuff. I really like it, and this of course is inspired by the way Adam looked in the vintage mini comics rather than the Filmation animated series. So he also comes with the toy-inspired head, if you want to put that on there instead. Again, it's got a much brighter blonde hair, very, very yellow on this guy there. You can see there's like really no details or no wash in the hair, so it's just so bright, it's like glowing there. But all of his articulation functions exactly the same, and he can hold on to the same weapons, and he's even got the same interchangeable hands, but they're the lighter skin tone. So you can do the fists or the open hands or whatever you want to, and it's the same thing with him. Yeah, you can see he doesn't really grip onto the sword as good as I'd like him to, because the handle's a little bit too big on there. But still, it's really cool. I think it's pretty neat getting a vintage style Prince Adam that's based on the mini comics. I actually like the look of this guy quite a bit. All right, guys, it's comparison time, and we're gonna do a whole bunch of that here. So let's just go ahead and do this first. We've got our brand new Origins He-Man with vintage He-Man and Masters of the Universe Classics He-Man all lined up there, so you can see it almost looks like I said it's an amalgamation of these two figures on the outside right there in the middle. It's like you mash the two of them together. It's really interesting stuff. But let's go ahead and take that a step further. Let's go ahead and get a real close-up look at the new Origins He-Man with like the vintage toy-inspired head standing alongside a vintage He-Man action figure there. Really interesting to look at these guys side by side. Vintage He-Man is just such a perfect action figure. I love it so much. So it's really interesting kind of seeing the idea of that figure, but with amped up articulation. And then let's go ahead and stand him alongside the Masters of the Universe Classics He-Man again, but also the Filmation He-Man from Club Grayskull, just so you can kind of see the full sweeping look at all of these He-Mans there. I even have the Alcala style Power Sword on our Classics He-Man, just to look at those side by side there. And let's bring it on over to Prince Adam, and we'll just go ahead and stand him alongside vintage Prince Adam, so you can look at those different vests there, the difference between those guys. And why don't we go ahead and put him with the Masters of the Universe Classics versions of Prince Adam. We did actually get a mini comic inspired version, so look at those guys with their cool blue vests right there next to each other. So while we're in the comparison time mode, there's a few other things I want to do here. I talked about how the heads are swappable on Origins, very similar to Classics. So that begs the question, can we swap between these two toy lines? Let's find out. So if I pop off the heads from both my Classics He-Man and my Origin He-Man, one of the things that I definitely want to point out is that the little ball joint on the new Origins figures is actually a little bit bigger than Masters of the Universe Classics. So you can see the Classics ball is a bit smaller. So if I try to swap parts on, the Masters of the Universe Classics He-Man head doesn't quite fit on the ball of the Origins figure. And you can actually get the Origins head all the way on, but it's loose. It's not snapping onto the ball. So it's really interesting because the scale is spot on. Like the heads are the same size, but it's the ball itself that is not the same size. So they're not perfectly interchangeable. They don't snap in place. But if this is something that Mattel might tweak going forward, if they're going to do more Origins figures, that's pretty cool and could open the doors for lots of different swappability between these two lines. I mean, I kind of hope they do that. Okay, here's the next thing I want to test. Weapons. Can we use the weapons from Masters of the Universe Classics with Origins here? So I've been talking about this Alcala sword. Let me just bring in here. These are two power swords from Masters of the Universe Classics. Like here's the Alcala sword from Classics. You can see that the Classics swords are a bit bigger than the new Origins swords. However, look at the grip on that. He actually holds that better, and it looks really, really good in his hand. Gets an actual much tighter grip on that handle. It's a better size. Here is like the standard power sword from Masters of the Universe Classics, and same thing. It actually looks really good. It might be a little big. You can see it's a little bit longer, but honestly, I like that quite a bit. So the Classics weapons do fit pretty well with the Origins figures. In fact, I would even say that he holds them better than his own weapons that he comes with. What about vintage? He's a vintage inspired figure. Should we try using the vintage weapons with him? Well, those don't really fit. The handle is much too small on vintage power sword. He just doesn't get a very good grip on it. You can kind of wrap it around his thumb there. So, you can kind of get him to hold it, but it's real loose there. You can see that. And then if we wanted to do like vintage battle axe, same thing. It is just much too loose. So the vintage weapons don't really work with these guys too much, but hey, Classics weapons from the 7-inch line actually fit really good with these figures. Pretty cool stuff. And just for fun, these guys are in the same scale as Masters of the Universe in the vintage line. You can probably imagine they're going to fit with some of those vintage things. I had to put him on Battle Cat. I even took the helmet off Battle Cat. That just felt right for this picture. And yeah, he totally sits on his back perfectly. It looks awesome. The scale is really, really great for that. So you could totally mix these guys around with some of your vintage toys if you wanted to do that. So there you go, my friends. That is a look at the upcoming Masters of the Universe Origins He-Man and Prince Adam 2-pack from Mattel. hopefully I've answered a lot of questions and I've covered a lot of stuff. It's always really interesting when we get something brand new from Masters of the Universe, like a whole new figure line. It's really crazy to think that it was 11 years ago at this point that we were looking at Masters of the Universe Classics debuting for the very first time. So here I am 11 years later, and I'm now reviewing a brand new He-Man figure once again. It's kind of amazing stuff. Now, will this turn into a brand new toy line? There's heavy rumors saying yes. Mattel has not confirmed that yet, so it's worth noting, but San Diego Comic-Con's in a couple days, and I have a feeling we're gonna get some information on these there. I will definitely be there to try to get whatever information I can. This set is sold exclusively at Comic-Con. Mattel has said that I think a limited amount will be sold online afterwards. I have no idea how that's gonna work yet, but as soon as we know, I will definitely share that everywhere that I can on my social media, so definitely stay tuned to that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and once again, thanks to Mattel for sending this along so we can get a good look at it outside of the packaging. Guys, thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Leave me a comment, let me know what you think of these guys, and please hit that subscribe button. I got Comic-Con coverage coming up, and you don't want to miss it. Until next time, my friends.